Welcome to this video hands-on training session for building your entitlement processes to reach your SLAs. My name is Patrick Conley. I'm a Salesforce developer with Red Hat, and I'm a Salesforce MVP. We'll get started with our safe harbor statement. This statement says that any forward-looking statements that I may make during this presentation should not be used to make any purchasing decisions. All purchasing decisions should be based on current functionality for the platform. It is unlikely that I'll make any forward-looking statements since this is only dealing with existing functionality, but just in case. So for our agenda here, we're going to go over an introduction to SLAs. We'll talk about business hours and holidays, and we'll create some. We'll enable entitlement management and talk about what entitlement management is. We'll talk about entitlement processes. We'll create some of those and some milestones. We'll talk about what milestone actions you can add to entitlement processes. We'll create some of those and add them to our entitlement processes. And then we'll talk about the entitlements object itself, and we'll create some entitlements and some cases that use the entitlement objects. So let's talk about what SLAs are. SLA stands for the service level agreement. It can either be a public agreement or a private agreement. For a public agreement, this would be something like you have on your website saying, for premium cases, we will respond within 1 hour, and we promise that we'll get you a resolution within 3 business days. Or they can be a private one that you set as a goal for your company, similar to the public, but just not displayed for the customer. These can be very useful for helping to drive up customer satisfaction. By setting these goals for your service level agreements, you ensure that your cases are worked in a timely manner. Business hours, the business hours define your working hours. They're very useful for geographically separated support centers, and they are different than real-world hours. If we take a look at this chart down here at the bottom, we can see that our business hours run from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and then we have our off hours are the times that our support center is not open. So for example, here we have a case if it is opened at 5 p.m., the case's response time is for 3 hours or 4 hours. The case's time stops when the business hours of the support center closes and then picks back up 8 a.m. the following day until the 12 o'clock time when we said we're going to give a first response. In addition to this, we have holidays. They can be used to create an exception to normal business hours, and they are completely optional. So in our first scenario here, we're going to configure an instance for a new support center. The support center offers 3 different business hour options. These include a 9 to 5, which is a 9-hour day, 5 days a week, a 9 by 7, so 9 hours by 7 days a week, and a 24 by 7, in other words, around-the-clock support coverage. However, you do not offer support for this fictional Fribs Day holiday for your customers that do not have 24 by 7 support. So our goal is going to be to create these business hours and the custom holiday. We'll create business hours for each one of the supported hours, and then we'll create our Fribs Day holiday. So I'm already logged into my custom org here, and we're going to go ahead and create our first business hours. Under the setup menu, we'll go to company profile, down to business hours. We already have this default business hours, so we want to go ahead and modify this to make it our new default, which is a 9 by 5. So we'll set our 9 by 5 business hours. We'll change the business hours name here to 9 by 5. We will come in here and uncheck the 24 hours for all of these. We will change the Sunday to blank, since we do not have support on Sunday. We'll change Monday to 9 a.m. and we'll do this for all the days. And then Saturday we'll blank out as well. And then we'll set our closing hours to 6 p.m. And then we'll use these business hours checked since we want this to be our default, and we'll leave it active, and the time zone we'll leave set to Pacific Daylight Time. And then we'll save that. So now we'll go ahead and create our 9 by 7 business hours. We'll click the new business hours button. We'll put in a name of 9 by 7. We'll mark it as active. This will not be our default, so we will leave that unchecked. And now we'll put in the 9x6 for Sunday and Saturday. And then we'll save. And then lastly, we'll create our 24x7 business hours. We'll give it the name of 24x7. We'll check the active button and leave the rest of those default. And then we'll check these for 24 hours. This will give us 24-hour coverage for all 7 days. And we'll save that. So now we have all 3 of our business hours created. We'll go ahead and create our Fribs Day holiday. So we'll go to Holidays under Company Profile, and we'll select New. We'll give it our name of Fribs Day and give it a description of the most casual of days. And we're going to go ahead and set it for tomorrow. And it's going to be an all-day holiday, and it will not be reoccurring. We'll save the holiday. And now we can, if we go back to our holidays list, we'll see that Fribs Day is here, and it is for tomorrow all day. Now, underneath our Fribs Day holiday, we need to say what business hours this applies to. Since this only applies to customers that do not have 24x7 support, we'll make it for our available business hours for both 9x5 and 9x7. Then we'll save that. And now we have this set up. So now we'll go ahead and get into our entitlement management. As we can see here, with entitlement management by default comes disabled. So we will need to enable it. And then once we enable it, we can take a look at some of the features that are available. The entitlement versioning allows you to have different versions of the same entitlement process. It's very useful if you have any changes that happen with your entitlement processes. That way you don't have to have 30 different entitlement processes when you just want to make a minor change. I really recommend doing this if you're starting out with brand new entitlement management. And then a little bit further down, we can see that there's some restrictions you can add to the case for entitlement lookup. I would recommend that you have the active status and the account on the case. These allow you to make sure that the entitlements that you're putting onto the case belong to the same account as the case, and that you are limited to only active entitlements so that your expired entitlements do not show up. We can also see that we have some additional things such as milestone feed items, which add to chatter, and the milestone trackers let you see the business hours that are remaining on the case. You can set this to be actual hours instead of business hours. I would recommend talking about that with your support group, since actual hours do make it a little easier to comprehend, since people don't really get sometimes why a case stops over the weekend or why it stops at the end of a day if you're not using a 24x7 support. So let's go ahead and go on to our next scenario. The scenario is we're going to reduce the amount of custom work you have to do, so we're going to use the standard entitlement object and use it with your support cases. Our goal is to enable entitlement management, add the entitlement information to the case layout. We'll enable it, we'll configure entitlement management, we'll set the field level security for the entitlement related fields, and then we'll add those fields to the case layout. Okay, so let's go ahead and enable the entitlement management. You can navigate this through Customize Entitlement Management or Settings, or here we'll go to the search bar and search for Entitlement Management, and then we'll click Settings. And then we'll check the Enable Entitlement Management Settings box and we'll save. Underneath here, we will enable entitlement versioning. It is important to note that once you do enable this, you cannot disable it. Entitlement versioning will remain even if you disable entitlement management. Underneath the entitlement lookup fields, we're going to set active status and the same account as the case. And we'll leave the rest of these as default. And then we'll save that. So now we'll need to enable the field level security for the entitlement fields. You can get to this by going to Customize Cases Fields, and here we'll just search in the box for cases, and we'll click on Fields. We'll click Entitlement Name, and we'll set the field level security. And just for the use for this demo, we'll go ahead and do it visible for all. and then we'll save. And we will need to repeat this for several fields. So if we go back to case fields, we'll do this again for business hours. Again, we'll set visible for all. Go back to our case fields. Do this for entitlement process end time. Entitlement process start time. Do this for milestone status. And lastly, for milestone status icon. Now, this will allow us to be able to both see and edit these fields for all of these profiles on the case. And now we'll go ahead and add these to the case layout. Again, we can get to customize cases and then down to page layouts, or I'm just going to search for cases and we'll go down to page layouts. We'll edit our open case layout and we're going to go ahead and add the following fields. We'll add entitlement name, entitlement process start time, end time, entitlement process start time, milestone status, and we'll add milestone status icon. And then we'll save our page layout. I forgot to do something there. We'll go down to our related lists and we'll add our case milestones to our related lists. And then I will save our page layout. And we'll default to writing over all the user's preferences. Now we'll go to the related list for the accounts layout. Again, you can go to customize accounts and then page layouts. I'm going to search for accounts. Go down to page layouts. We'll edit the account layout. And then we'll go to the related lists and add entitlements. And then we'll save that page layout. So let's talk about entitlement processes. Entitlement processes determine how your case will behave. They can be configured for when to start and when to exit. For example, in the screenshot here, we have it'll start the process based on the case's created date, and it'll end when the case is marked as closed. You can also use specific business hours, or you can use the business hours that are specified on the case. For example, with our 24/7 entitlement process, we can say only use that hour and override what is on the case. So for our next scenario, your support organization offers both premium and standard levels of support based on the following table. Our first response for our premium support gets an hour for high priority cases and 6 hours for first response for normal priority. We have until 2 business days to close the case, and we have 6 business days for normal. And then for standard, again, we have 4 business hours for first response for high, 4 business days for case closure, and then 12 business hours for normal and 8 business days to close the case. Our goal for this is to create milestones and entitlement processes. Our task will create our first response and case closure milestones. We'll create a premium and standard entitlement process, and we'll add the milestones to meet our expected response times. Again, from the setup menu, we'll go ahead and go to customize, entitlement management, and milestones. I'm going to search for milestones in the sidebar here. And we're going to go ahead and create our new milestone for our first response. We'll give it a name of first response. And description of the first response to the case. And this will have a no recurrence. Since it'll only happen once, there'll only be one first response to a case. And then we'll go back to our milestones. We'll create a new milestone, and this will be our case resolution. And this is when the case gets resolved. And its recurrence type is going to be independent. So now we need to create our entitlement processes. Again, under Customize Entitlement Management, we can look at entitlement processes, and we'll create our premium entitlement process. Give it a name of premium, description of the premium entitlement process. We're going to mark it as active, and we'll leave the initial things here first, and we'll give it a version note of version, and we're going to leave everything else here as default. We will leave the entitlement process business hours blank, as we want it to use the one from the case. So we'll go ahead and save that. Now we'll need to create some milestones. So under here we'll click the New button, and we're going to give the milestone name of first response, the trigger time of 60 minutes. This is going to be our, this will be real world minutes, not business minutes. So we will set the milestone business hours to 24/7, and we'll set the order to 1. And then for our criteria, we'll say case priority equals high. And then we have a field that we created on this called owner comment count. This is updated by a very simple trigger that I would not use in production, but it's just going to show us what we need, and this will update every time a comment is added by the case owner. And so as long as the case owner comment count is equal to 0, then this first response milestone will exist. So now we'll save this milestone, and we'll repeat for our normal business, or for our normal priority. So we have one for high. So we'll create our first response milestone, and it's going to be a trigger time of 360 minutes. That is 6 regular hours. We'll set the milestone business hours to 24/7. Again, since this is regular hours instead of business hours, we want it to continue to tick down even outside of the normal 9 to 6 business hours that we have set up. We'll set the order to 2. We will set the priority of the case when it equals normal, and we will again go to our owner comment count and it must equal 0, and then we'll save that entitlement milestone. So now that we have our 2 first response milestones for premium, we need to add our case closure milestones. So we'll click New. We'll give pick the milestone name of case closure, a time trigger of 2 business days. So that is going to be 1,080 minutes. 2 times 9 business hours times 60 minutes is 1,080. It's a lot of math. And this is where having versioning comes into handy, because if you did not have entitlement versioning, you'd have to manually create each one of these milestones by hand every time, and I assure you it gets very tedious. So we're going to set this order to be 3. And since in this case our orders doesn't really matter since they don't conflict, but if you had things that possibly conflicted, such as having a priority and then you had an additional operator, they will pick the higher order one. For us, it doesn't really matter. So we'll go ahead and select high, and we'll save that. And then we'll create our last milestone for our normal priority. So we'll set a case resolution, set a trigger time of 3,240 minutes. Again, that is 6 business days. We'll leave the business hours blank. We'll set the order here to 4, and we'll set our field priority equals to normal, and we'll click Save. Now we'll see here for our premium entitlement process, we have a first response for high, a first response for normal, a case resolution for high, and a case resolution for normal. Okay, and now we'll go ahead and create our standard entitlement process. So going back to the entitlement process list, we'll create new entitlement process. So we'll go ahead and give it a name of standard, give it the description of the standard entitlement process. We'll mark it as active. We'll go ahead and give it a version note of initial version. And we'll leave the rest of this to the defaults. We'll save. And just as we did with the premium entitlements, we'll need to create entitlement milestones for each one of our parts of our table. So for entitlement name, we'll create a first response. We'll give it a trigger time of 240 minutes. This is going to be 4 business hours. And since we're dealing with business hours, we'll leave the milestone business hours to be that of the case. We'll set this to be an order of 1. We'll set the priority equal to high. We'll set the owner comment count equal to 0. And then we'll save. And we'll create one for the normal priority. Again, we'll select first response. We'll give it 720 minutes. This is 12 business hours. Again, we'll leave the milestone business hours blank. We'll set the order to 2. We'll look at priority equal to normal. Set the owner comment count equal to 0. Save that milestone. Now we'll create our case closure or case resolution milestone. For this, we're going to have a case closure of 4 business days. So that is 2,160. That is 2,160 minutes. And again, this is business days, so we'll leave milestone business hours to be that of the case. We'll set an order of 3, and this is going to be for our high priority cases. And then we'll save. And then lastly, we'll create our case resolution for our normal cases. And then with our normal cases, we're looking at 8 business days. So that is 4,320 minutes. We'll set an order of 4. And a case priority equal to normal. So let's talk about some actions you can take with these milestones. Now that we've created them, we want to actually do something with them when we reach our breach times. Some types of actions you can take. You can create a new task. You can create a new email alert. You can update a field. You can send an outbound action, or you can select an existing action. The selecting existing action will let you select one of the previous 4 I mentioned. And I really recommend that you try to use the existing action. Reusability is your friend. This will allow you to, for example, if we're going to create an email alert, you create one email alert that will send to, for say, a manager. And then you can use that one email alert on all of your entitlement processes. And then if you need to change who that email alert goes to, say you want to add the owner, you only have to update one email alert instead of updating a randomly named one for every single milestone that you created. So in our scenario here, if a violation of an SLA occurs, we want to notify the case owner via email. If it's a high priority case and it breaches, we want to create a new task, and we want to create it for the Senior Vice President of Customer Service and Support to follow up on the case. So our goal here is to create an action that occurs when the case breaches this SLA. We'll create our new email alert, we'll create our task to create it, and then we'll assign these actions to the milestones. So from our setup menu here, we'll go to Create Workflows and Approvals and Email Alerts. Again, I will just search for Email Alerts. and then we'll click New Email Alert. So we'll go ahead and create our breach notification email alert. Give it a description of breach notification. We'll check our object of case, and we'll look for our email template that we created called breach. This is just going to have a simple, the support case has breached. For the recipient type, we're going to choose owner. We'll choose available recipients, and we'll move the case owner over. And in this case, we're going to use the current user's email address. Typically, you'd probably want to do this from an org-wide email address, but we didn't want to set that up for this presentation. So we'll save that. And now we have our new case breach notification. So now we want to create our task for when the case, high priority cases breaches. So if we go and search for workflow and approvals tasks, so we'll search for tasks, and we'll create a new one here. Create a new task. We'll choose case as our object. We will assign this to, so for this instance, we're going to look for the role of SVP. We're going to choose our customer service and support SVP. We'll give it a subject of reach out to customer. And we're going to set a due date of rule trigger plus 2 days. So to give them 2 days to reach out to the customer. Status we'll leave as not started, and we'll leave the priority as normal. And then we will save our task creation. Now we need to go ahead and add the breach notification email to the premium milestones. So under Customize, Entitlement Management, Entitlement Processes. Again, we'll just search for Entitlement Processes. We'll choose Premium. We'll choose our version 1 of our entitlement process. We'll click on the first response for our high priority. And now here's where you have your actions that you can apply for different types of breaches. Success is when a milestone has been marked as complete. A warning lets you set times before the due date of the milestone. And then violation actions happen on or after the entitlement has breached its SLA. So for this, we're going to add a time trigger for violation. We're going to set it to 0 minutes after first response. We'll click Save. So now we have our violation action for 0 minutes after. We'll add a workflow action. We'll do a select existing action. And since this is our high priority, we want to have the task for reach out to customer. And we also want to email alert the breach notification to the owner. So now that we have these two actions on there, we'll save. And now we can see that this now has the task and email alert for 0 minutes after this milestone breaches. So if we go back to our premium entitlement, we can click here the entitlement process name, and it'll take us back to the one we're working on. We're going to do the same thing or similar thing for the first response for normal. Since this is a normal response, we are not going to notify our normal priority. We are not going to notify the SVP. So again, we'll set 0 minutes after the first response. And all we will do this time, select an existing action, we'll just send our breach notification to the case owner. So now we'll go back to our premium entitlement process, and we want to have the case resolution. Again, this is for a high priority case, so we do want to notify the SVP when this one breaches. So we'll have 0 minutes after case resolution. And then again, we'll add existing action. We'll add our task to reach out to customer and our email alert for breach notification. We'll save that. And lastly, we have our case resolution for normal priority. We will do 0 minutes after case resolution. And since this is a normal one, we will not be adding the task. We will only be adding the email alert. We'll save that. Now we have everything set up for our premium. So now we'll go ahead and go back to our entitlement process list, and we're going to do the same thing for standard. Choose our first response, 0 minutes after, and since this is our high, we'll select our task and our email alert, and we'll save. Then we'll do it for our first response for our normal priority. Again, we'll select existing action. Since this is normal, we will not add our task. Then for our high case resolution, we'll have 0 minutes after. And this is a high, so we'll have our task as well as our email alert. And lastly, we have it for our normal case resolution. So 0 minutes. And you can see here, if we did not have our existing, if we weren't using existing alerts and existing tasks, and we created a new one for every one of these, we would have 8 individual email alerts and 4 different task notifications, and updating those would be very time consuming. So now we've got all those added for our entitlement process. So let's go ahead and talk about entitlements. One of the standard objects that comes with Salesforce is the entitlement object. The entitlement object has several fields on it, the name being one of the most important ones. I recommend using this to define what your process actually includes so that it's easily determinable from the name. For the example here, we have premium phone support. If a technician were to look at this entitlement, they would know exactly what this contains. You have the status as well as the status icon. Both of those are driven by the start and end date. The start and end date are set, and if it is between or today, if it ends after today or on today, it'll be marked as active and it'll have that green check mark. And then you can have this tied to an account, a service contract, an asset name. There are additional things you can have, such as per incident, which we're not going to talk about here. And you can even set the individual business hours per the entitlement. So we'll talk about here in a little bit, adding a 24/7 entitlement, and you can set the business hours there. It is important to note that once you've assigned the business process to a case, you cannot edit that version anymore. This is where versioning comes in to play. If you have assigned an entitlement process to an entitlement and that entitlement is on a case and it is being actively or has been used, you cannot edit it. You have to create a new version and then up the version of that entitlement. So for this scenario, we're going to go ahead and start selling support entitlements. These entitlements will denote what type of support the customer gets. Our goal is to create an entitlement for an account and create cases that use them. We'll create new entitlements, and then we'll open cases against those entitlements. So from the Accounts tab, we're going to go ahead and we'll find our first account, and we're going to look for Burlington. We're looking for Burlington Textiles Corp of America. Let's see the account here. If we scroll down, we'll want to create a new entitlement. We'll create a premium phone support entitlement for them. We'll set the start date to today and an end date from a year to now. Since this is just going to be a premium entitlement process, we'll choose premium. And this is not a 24/7, so we will leave the business hours blank and let that go based on the case's business hours. So we'll save that entitlement process. And we can see here underneath the milestones that we have first response milestones and case resolution milestones based on the premium entitlement process. So we're going to go ahead and create a standard entitlement underneath a different account. So if we go to look for the GenePoint account, and we go down to entitlements, we'll go ahead and create a standard phone support entitlement. Again, we'll set the start date to today and end date from a year from now. And then we'll choose an entitlement process of standard. And then we'll save this entitlement. And then again, we have our expected minutes to complete for these milestones based on the standard entitlement process. So now if we go back to our Burlington Textiles account and we go down to cases, we'll create a new case here. We will find our contact of Jack Rogers. Select a case origin of phone. For this case, we're going to set the priority to high, and we'll leave the business hours the default 9 to 5, and then we'll find the premium phone support entitlement for this case. And we'll go ahead and add some additional information there, and we'll save our case. So if we take a look at the case we just created, and we scroll down to our case milestones, we'll see that it has a first response milestone of 1 business hour. And you can see here we also have a case resolution of 2 business days. We can see that the case status is compliant, and the case milestone is a green check because both of these are valid and not completed. So now as the owner, we'll go ahead and add a new case comment. And save the case. And now we can see that our first response milestone has disappeared. If you wanted to, you could write some Apex code to mark that as a completed milestone and then leave this in your case milestone list as completed. I do find that useful so that it shows a little bit better reporting and be able to show that it was actually completed. But it does require some custom Apex coding. So we'll go ahead and go back to our accounts. From accounts, let's go back to our Burlington Textiles Corp. And let's create a new case for them. So we'll create a new case. Again, we'll choose Jack Rogers. We'll leave this one as a high priority, or change this to a high priority again. Case origin of phone. We'll select their premium phone entitlement. And we'll enter some more information again. We'll save. And just as before, we have a 60-minute response time for our first response, since this is a high case. Now if we go into here and we change the priority of the case from high to normal and save, we'll see that now, instead of being the 60 minutes that we initially had, we'll see that now we have the 6 hours or 360 minutes. And we can see now that we have the 3,240 minutes or 6 business days for our case resolution. Now, if we were to take a look at this target date, we would see that since this is business hours, we're actually going to skip tomorrow since we have our holiday, and this is a 9/5 business hours. So we can take a look again. If we change the business hours, we'll change this to be 24/7. And now this case is going to have 24/7 support. So we can see our target date still remains the same for our first response, since this is based on real world hours, so it's still going to be 360 minutes. And same here, our minutes are still going to be the 3,240 minutes. But we can see that instead of being September 22nd, we're dealing with September 16th for our case resolution, since we're now using our 24/7 business hours, which no longer honors the Fribbs Day holiday and no longer honors the weekends. So the timer here is going to be 3,238 real-world minutes remaining. So now that we've gone over how to use the entitlements, that should cover everything you need to know to get started with them. There are lots of other things you can do. I do recommend that you try to tailor your entitlement process as the best fit what'll work for your support center. And I want to thank you for joining me in this video hands-on training session to build your entitlement processes and to reach your SLAs.